Good evening all and welcome. As voted for by you, tonight we have a collection of paranormal stories. So get comfortable, because it's time to let the darkness take control. When I was 19, my best friend was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. We knew her cancer was terminal, and she had a life expectancy of 5 years at most. Her and I would talk every now and then about passing on, and how even though I was healthy, I could always go before her in a car crash or some other way. We made a pact that no matter which one of us left first, we would return to let the other know that there was more to life after death. She eventually passed away from her illness at 22, leaving behind her husband and 3-year-old son. She passed away on Sunday at 8:20 a.m. I remember the call from her husband vividly. He asked me to bring her son to the hospital because she had passed away. That day was a complete blur. I couldn't find myself to come to the reality that she was no longer with us. It all felt unreal. We were allowed to be with her for a few hours in her hospital room before she was taken away. But while we were there with her, I was in complete shock, and my mind just couldn't process it. But I didn't cry. Leaving the hospital was so strange, because at the time I had no children, and my life revolved around my work, my home, and her. She lived a few minutes from my job at the time, so I would always leave work very early to see her, whether she was at home or the hospital. I loved her so much, I could never be away from her. So now knowing I had to go home and try to process that I would never see her again, threw my life for a spin. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept trying to make sense of it all. In honesty, I don't even remember the thoughts that were going through my head, but the feelings of loss and confusion were very prevalent in me. I couldn't sleep at all. At around 3 a.m., I felt the most beautiful and reassuring feeling I have ever felt. I felt what I can only describe as a warm hug take over me from head to toe, and I fell asleep. That night I had a dream. In my dream, I called her husband to let him know that she had written me a letter. He then tells me that it's funny because she left him a voicemail. He then asks me to read him the letter, so I read it to him. In this letter, she tells me how thankful she is that we were in her life. She thanked us for taking care of her and loving her, and asked us to please watch over her son, and that she is okay and no longer in pain. She also tells me that we will be okay. As I finish telling him about the letter, my mum comes into the room and wakes me up. She asks me for a pen and paper. I hand her a piece of paper I had and she starts to write. When she finishes, she hands it to me saying she doesn't know why, but something told her to write this and to give it to me. When I read the letter, it was word for word what my best friend had told me in my dream, and she signed it with her father's last name. Now my mum only knew her by her mother's last name. No one outside her close relatives and myself knew what her father's last name even was, so I was very confused as to how she signed it with her father's last name. I asked her why or how she wrote this to me, but my mum didn't know. She just wrote. I explained to her about my dream, and she was as surprised as I was. Immediately, her husband called, and I told him about the letter in my dream. He agreed they were all her words. My best friend came through with her promise. This made me a believer. I know there is more after death. When I was 8 years old, my mother and stepfather decided that they were going to move to northern Arkansas for them to have better job opportunities. It just so happened that they chose to buy a house that was about an acre away through open fields from a late 1800s to early 1900s cemetery. There was an old abandoned hand-built church that stood on the property that was no longer in use, and me and some of the neighborhood kids used to go and play in there. Nothing unusual had ever happened or given me the spooks until my 9th birthday. My mum made me invite all of the girls in my class at school to my sleepover party, and after we were done doing presents and everything, she told all of us to go outside and play. So the first thing I wanted to do was take all of my friends over to the church house to show them around. One of the girls that was sort of a loner anyway left the group and went weaseling through the actual cemetery, which was something that my mum had told me never to do. So the girl and I wound up getting into an argument, and she decided to go stomping on the graves and be disrespectful to the dead. I went and tattled, of course, so my mum made us come inside as it was getting close to dark. We all got ready for bed, and we were getting settled down in my bedroom when all of a sudden the door slammed shut by itself, which freaked all of us out and made us scream. So my mum came barging through the door to see what happened and told us all to calm down, blamed it on the air conditioning, and said we needed to get laid down. After a few moments of her walking away, we all got nestled in, but hadn't turned the lights off yet, when the doors slammed shut by themselves again, and it started rattling and vibrating on its hinges. My mum came bursting through to see which one of us was causing the ruckus, but we all told her what happened again, and she still didn't believe us. So she shut off the light and left the door open. Mind you, I was deathly afraid of the dark, and since the other girls were there and couldn't sleep with a nightlight on, my mum wouldn't let me use mine. So when the door slammed shut a third time, and the room was once again thrown into complete darkness, I went absolutely berserk with sobs and panic. At that point, my mum was getting downright pissed off because she thought that it was us. She opened the door, pulled me out of bed, told the girls that they had better get quiet before she had to start calling parents, and she made me go to sleep on the couch in the pitch darkness while I cried into my pillow where no one could hear me. I had gotten used to this, since my mum always treated my night terrors with little to no empathy. The next thing I know, I feel something pull my covers down a little, so I get stiff as a board, and peeped my head up, just in time to see this black, hairy-looking fog thing slithering back down the couch towards another, bigger, black, hairy-looking fog thing that was connected to it, that was resting on top of the entertainment center. I was frozen in shock. At this point, I couldn't make a sound until this thing had gotten halfway across the living room and was almost to the couch. Then I finally let out a blood-curdling screech. My stepdad finally came in this time, and when he flipped on the lights, the fog thing vanished. I was hyperventilating, so he told me to come and get into bed with them. I finally calmed down, went to sleep, and everything was fine for the rest of the night. Fast forward to the next night, everyone had gone home and it was back to the normal routine, so that I could get ready for school the next day. When I laid down, I felt like something was watching me, so I insisted that my mum let me use my nightlight, but she wouldn't budge on the issue, and finally agreed to leave the hallway light on with my door cracked instead. I did my little whimpering like usual until I was finally drifting off and saw this fog thing coming towards me again, but I was too tired to wake myself back up. The dream that I had that night was one of the scariest things I've ever dreamt of in my life, and it became a reoccurring dream for the next few months. I always woke up in a sweat and jolting myself from my bed to run to my parents' room. One night where the dream finally ended with me being ripped to shreds by these three little demon-looking things, which hadn't happened any of the other nights, I never had that dream again. But I also have only had a handful of dreams ever since. It's like my mind decided to shut itself off from the traumatic experiences the dreams were giving me. That, or the entity decided to start hijacking my dreams from me. I'm not really sure. My belongings apport and reappear in the most random, obvious places, specifically keys, not just mine but others as well. There are always weird noises in every house that I move to. People that I live with have witnessed it. I've got pictures of it too. It throws things sometimes when it wants my attention, and it gets stronger the longer I live in one place. It's like if I move to a new house, it weakens the entity for a while, but it always manages to gain strength as it gets comfortable. It never really has done anything to harm me or anyone else per se, but it's always lurking, making its existence known, and gives everyone in my house the creeps. I've tried doing cleansing and prayers and all the spiritualistic stuff that most people advise, but those things don't even faze it in the slightest. What's even weirder is the fact that when I get very upset or angry, things fall off shelves or even fly towards me, like Matilda. And I've even blown lights out just by touching the switch when I'm in one of these moods. My hair constantly stays full of static. So much so that I literally have to use spray that you can iron your clothes with to keep my hair from sticking to my face. And orbs are starting to make themselves visible on a regular basis inside my home. Is it possible that something is manifesting by the suppression of my fears or something? The spiritual energy on my property is so intense I literally don't know how to explain it to people without sounding like I've lost all my marbles. I've done plenty of research over the years into possibilities, but have come up empty-handed every single time. Any information or insight would be appreciated more than you can understand. This happened when I was 8 years old. I woke up one night to go to the bathroom when I heard my mother argue in her bedroom. It's worth noting that my mother was quite unwell, and we knew that eventually the sickness would claim her. However, at no point did it affect her mind. She was arguing in her bedroom, and it caught my attention because she sounded rather upset. "No, I don't want to go," she kept on saying in an angry tone. I tiptoed in to see who she was talking to, but when I observed, there was no one there. She was talking to the wall. Eventually, just being a child and a bit tired, I returned to bed, and the next morning I spoke to her normally. Like I said, her mind was unaffected by the illness. And then I gave her a kiss goodbye for the day. A few hours later, she'd passed on. I still remember the look in her eyes when she waved at me through the doorway, which she never did normally. She knew that she would never see me again. It happened back in 2008. I was a junior in high school hanging out with an old girlfriend of mine and her friend at my house, while the rest of my family flew out to Washington to visit family the previous night. The night was any typical teenager hangout. We ordered Pizza Hut, played Guitar Hero, and played some homemade spirit games, things with fire. You light the fire and ask the ghost a question. If the fire moves, it means whatever. Anyway, profoundly normal things. For reference, we were all hanging out in the attic, which at the time was my bedroom. The staircase led right under the living room, which has a bead door at the bottom. You can usually hear someone coming through them to get up, but this shook all of us to our core. We were well and done playing ghost games and playing Guitar Hero, when out of nowhere during a break, a blood-curdling scream from a woman shrieked from the bottom of the stairs. It almost sounded fake, like a corny movie scream, but loud and panicked for sure. We froze and heard nothing else, no beads, no footsteps, nothing. My house was old, so you often heard and felt people moving around in it, but there was nothing. I got the courage to charge the living room with a pocket knife after yelling that we were calling the cops, but to our surprise there was nothing. The doors and windows were locked. It was the middle of a particularly nasty Michigan snowstorm, so there weren't even footprints outside the house. We all ran outside and went to the end of the short driveway, looking in the window from afar for an intruder. We called the police and they came and searched the entire house for us while we sat in my 90s Pontiac Grand Prix. After an hour, they came back and found no one. After this, I ran into the house, grabbed my essentials and drove to my best friend's house, and ended up crashing at his place for 3 months after that. I refused to sleep in the house until my family had returned from Washington. To this day I have no clue what it was, but it sends shivers down my spine thinking about that scream, even as an adult. Nothing else ever happened at the house, and nothing really happened before either. It was random as hell. My first experience was working in a haunted hotel. I was taking pictures on the 12th floor attic area when I got the sensation that I should not be doing that. As I walked down the stairs, a little voice in the back of my head told me to be careful. Later that day, I was pulling a big laundry cart through a doorway when somehow my little finger got caught between it and the doorframe. I had to wear a splint for a few weeks. I apologized to whatever it was and took care not to record videos or pictures. A second time was a little more my fault and I paid for it. I was feeling like something was messing with me, and I told it to not be a little prick. I kept getting things thrown or knocked over my table as I was working that day, and I realized what I had said and apologized. The third time wasn't intentional on my part. I was having a rough day because the previous shift dropped the ball on the job. I made a comment to myself about whatever was there messing with them. It didn't take it too kindly that I insulted it. I went down to the break room to check something on the computer, and as I was going to sit down, it felt like the chair was just rolled out from under me, just enough for me to slip and fall on my ass. I was okay, quickly righted myself, and muttered that I wasn't being serious but apologized again. Try and take heed from my stories. When you're in a paranormal location or something similar, be respectful and open-minded to what may be watching you that you can't see. It was late Sunday evening around 9 p.m. I was in my room just playing video games like usual, until I heard the shower turn on. The bathroom was right beside my room, and the door requires some slamming to be shut properly. I didn't hear the door being slammed, but disregarded it as my own lack of attention to it, since I was fully immersed in my video game. About an hour later, my game was finished, but I noticed that the shower was still on for some reason. Now I, for one, take long showers too, usually around 40 minutes or so, but no one else in the family usually takes that long. So I asked my dad if my aunt was home, because my parents and brother were all downstairs in the living room. No one else could have been there besides my aunt. However, my dad said my aunt hadn't come home yet. I told my dad that someone was in the bathroom taking a shower. He went to check, and the lights were still on, but the shower was now off. We knock on the door. Once, twice, no answer. He opens the door and there's no one there, not a single soul. My dad thought I was pranking him, but I told him I wasn't. He still doesn't believe me. Who was there? How did the shower turn on? Why were the lights still on with a closed door? I'll never know the answer to these questions, but to make it even creepier, I dreamt about a dark figure with glowing eyes standing at the top of the staircase that is on the same floor as the bathroom, and the room beside mine always has a slight cool breeze circulating in there. When I was 14 to 15, I came home a little tipsy. My room was on the top floor of our house, and I went straight to bed. While lying down, I heard someone trying to get someone's attention. The sound was, psst, psst. We've been living here for the longest time, but I remember there were stories of maids being murdered by the previous owners before, but everyone thought it was just old wives' tales, so I really didn't pay too much heed to it. I tried to ignore it and realized it's getting a little louder. Since I was a little inebriated, I found the courage to call out, "If you're really a ghost, then prove it." I then felt a slap inside my right thigh which made me immediately sit up straight. I stood up and reached for the light and looked inside my room, but no one was there. I pulled down my pants and noticed a red, welt-shaped hand forming with the fingers pointing towards my gonads, so the slap seemed like it was made by someone sitting at the end of the bed. Needless to say, I bunked with my brother for a few months after that. Some kids in my primary school did the Charlie game and a girl's desk flipped over. I remember it being really weird because we had those metal desks that only seat one. If they were pushed, the desks landed on their side. But when the girl's desk was flipped, it landed on its top. I think we all ran out screaming after that, and we had to get the school blessed. There was also a lot of worry about the demon sticking to someone, i.e. the girls whose desk flipped over. There were a lot of conflicting reports over how to get rid of a demon. Some people said you had to read the entire Bible, others said you had to burn the paper you played the game on. Some of those primary school friends ended up in secondary school with me. They validated what we saw at the same day. It's part of the reason why I never toy around with stuff like Ouija boards or summoning spirits. No thank you. I always suspected my place of being haunted. One day when I was home, my phone kept falling on the floor. Whenever I walked out of the room, I would hear a thump, and it would be my phone in the middle of the room. This happened about 3 times during the day. Right before I went to bed, I put my phone on my nightstand, and as I was walking out of the room, I heard a bang on the wall. I walked out of the room, and my phone was once again on the floor. I picked up my phone and put it back on my nightstand and said out loud, "If someone's here, push my phone on the floor again." I literally watched my phone slide across my nightstand and fall to the floor. I was completely shaken. So I put my phone back on the nightstand and asked it to push it off again, and it happened again. If rent wasn't so damn cheap, I would be out of there. There is this curious thing in my childhood home. My family call it the empty spot. You see, when you walk over to it, you get a sensation in your stomach like you're falling. That's the best way I can describe it. But there's another aspect to it too, one which many people will find unbelievable. And I respect that. I would be skeptical too. But it happened. You see, this one time, me and my dad and my brother were getting some coffee, and my dad dropped his phone. We all heard it hit the floor, but the phone was gone. It had vanished. It would not ring if we called it or anything. It was a very bizarre thing. Dad obviously wasn't happy and had to get a new phone. But a few years after that, me and my brother were hanging out and heard something hit the floor. Curious, we went over to see what it was and were flabbergasted where right there on the ground in the empty spot was Dad's phone. Just as if it had been dropped moments ago, but this is years in the future now. We look at each other in fascination and horror. How the hell did this even happen? It's honestly one of the weirdest things I've ever heard of, and wish to know what exactly causes it. When I was 18, my boyfriend at the time picked me up and said we were going to see a house he's interested in renting before grabbing lunch. His mum was the real estate agent, so she was going to meet us there. Cool, no problem. We pull up to the driveway, and that's when I start to feel a bit sick. I was totally fine before, so I figured the sensation would pass. As we're walking up to the door, his mum must have seen us because she came out to say hello. We walked back inside, and they stood there talking in the foyer area. Me? I went right to the master bedroom and stared at a corner between the bed and the bathroom, and I felt insanely nauseous at this point, and I told myself I found a bathroom because I felt sick, nothing spooky. My boyfriend came in and asked me what was up. All of a sudden I started spouting that Gertrude had died in the house of a heart attack, and I felt like she was still here. He started laughing and said that I can just say I don't like the house, and I told him I wasn't kidding and to ask his mum. It's probably worth mentioning at this point, I've always had a bit of an empathic side, but my family tried to tell me we have a special intuition, and I didn't believe it until right now. I stayed frozen in that bedroom while he went to ask. In hushed tone, I hear him ask, and his mum responds, "What? How did she know that?" Yes, a woman named Gertrude died recently. She was 87 and had a heart attack in the home. My legs gave out and I hit the floor. I don't have the address for this place, didn't do any research on it, and I don't know who lived there. There was no explanation for what happened, other than something paranormal. Before I begin, I want to give a bit of context. This was about 7 years ago, and my boyfriend at the time and I had just gotten back together after a brief separation. Jerry's brother had gotten married and bought a house, so Jerry and I agreed to stay in the home to clean it while they returned. Looking back, that's a little bit weird to me, but whatever, I was happy to help. One night while we were staying in the home, Jerry and I were unpacking and washing dishes. Jerry wanted to celebrate the fact that we had gotten together, so he left me to grab some ingredients to cook me dinner. While he was gone, I put Pandora on and kept washing dishes. The phone I used at the time had a speaker on the back, so I left my phone on the couch face down playing music. It's important to note that my phone had about 15% battery left. After about 15 minutes or so, the music cut off. I figured my battery had died, so I kept on washing the dishes. However, I couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that filled the home when there wasn't any sound. I quickly finished washing the dishes as quickly as I could and walked over to my phone. When I turned it over, I was shocked to see that my phone hadn't died. It had about 10% battery left. Pandora was still on and the volume was still up. I sat on the couch and began messing around with it, trying to get the music to play again, but nothing worked. Now, it's important to note the layout of the house. As I'm sitting on the couch, I'm facing the kitchen. The front door and dining room are to my left, and there's an archway to the hallway to my right. If you were to stand in the archway to the hall, there'd be a bathroom in front of you, a bedroom with windows to your right, and a bedroom with no windows to your left. As I'm on the couch messing with my phone, I see a shadow pass by the archway super quickly, almost as quickly as a blink of an eye. What do? What every first victim of a movie serial killer does. I follow it. My brain registers the figure as a woman with a long dress and long black hair, but I couldn't see her face. I followed her down the hallway, of course, into the dark bedroom with no windows. The only thing in this room was a closet with older metal accordion doors which were slightly open. When I stepped into the doorway of this room, I froze. I couldn't move or speak. She stood in the corner of the room opposite me, and we stood there frozen. It felt like I was there for an hour, but it was only a few seconds. Almost immediately after I walked into the room, Jerry came back. When he didn't see me in the kitchen or living room, he yelled out, "Babe?" But when I didn't answer, he yelled out again, "Babe, baby." As much as I wanted to scream back, I couldn't. All of a sudden, the accordion door started shaking. She started screaming and coming towards me. In my head, I'm screaming and trying to do anything I can to get myself to move. When I'm finally sure this is how it ends, I get plucked off the ground and am popped over Jerry's shoulder. Next thing I know, he sets me down on the couch and asks me, "Why did you follow her? You know not to follow them. Why did you follow her?" Jerry happened to have some sage spray. Again, now thinking back on this, all weird. How did he know about her? After we lit a few candles, the eerie feeling went away, and nothing else happened. But that is something I will never forget. I've seen something similar after that, like years after, but I wasn't with Jerry, or even in the same house. I truly wonder what it was I experienced that night. I grew up in a farmhouse that was built in 1898 that had a chimney. For some reason, I was looking into the chimney and saw a bag-looking thing. So I reached in to grab it, and when I did, something grabbed me. I ended up with bruises all the way around my wrist, and there were teeth in this small burlap bag. The second thing was me and a friend were out hunting on one of his dad's fields. This particular field was completely surrounded by woods, and he was on one side and I was on the other, both of us looking towards the end of the field where we had spotted deer. Something that had predator-like camo, making no sound or anything, hovered in the middle of the field between us. It looked like a constant heat wave distorting the fog, and maybe it was because it caused a lot of moisture in the air that the area to condense into droplets you could hear hitting the crops. I don't know what it was because I don't believe in UFOs. I honestly can't grasp the size or shape of the object, but it seemed like something was just there, barely beyond our perception. This past weekend, my parents had an experience. I did not make much of it, and neither did the rest of my family. This parent got up in the morning for work. However, they were washing some dishes from the night before. I woke up and was able to hear them wash the dishes and everything. No one else in the home was awake besides one of our pets. My parents came into the room and asked for my sibling. I mentioned that they were asleep upstairs. We have a single room upstairs, somewhat like an attic but used as a bedroom, which houses my other sibling. At this point, my parent told me to swear that my sibling was upstairs, and I explained that yes, they were, as I had not seen them come down. My parent then said that they had seen my sibling run around the house and could feel the feet and items move as they ran. They were so sure that they walked over to peek around the couch to scare them while playing hide and seek. We did not discuss this further. However, more recently I have also seen the same sibling at home despite everyone being away. The sibling is still in grade school, so they wake up and are taken to school by one of my parents. I was also getting ready to leave for work, and as I was heading out of the bathroom, our cat ran and hid behind the bed. He's a kitten, so he's very playful. The hiding is not suspicious, to me at least, as he'd been running around and playing by himself throughout the morning. I was leaving from the bathroom and heading towards the bed to play with the cat. My bedroom door is in front of the door that leads to the dining room/common area. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw this sibling sitting on the dining table eating breakfast with only hair covering their face, and I even made out their clothes. As I went to play with the cat, it occurred to me to tell this sibling to stop playing with the cat and to hurry up, or they'd be late for school. As I walk out of my bedroom, I remember my parents had already left with them, and I was the only one in the house at the time. I used to have one of those sort of bunk beds that had a desk underneath. Now and then I'd be laying in the bed and hear this breathing behind me. I'd jump right the hell out of bed and run to my parents' room and sleep on the floor. My mum told me to not be silly and that ghosts don't breathe, which is a fair point. So another time I came out of my room and noticed that the loft hatch was open and some silhouette of a person was looking down from the loft. I thought it was one of my parents and thought nothing of it. I went downstairs and my dad was on the couch and my mum in the kitchen. That's when I get a weird feeling and walked back up the stairs to look up, and the loft hatch was now closed. I went out and took a long walk that day, thinking I must have been imagining things. It just feels so strange. About 3 months ago, I was on my way home from my second oldest son's house. It was late evening, but still daylight. The road that I was traveling was a state route 2-lane. The area is rural with a combination of cornfields and woods, with quite a few hilly areas. Traffic was fairly light. At one point, I come upon a fire truck blocking the roadway that was closed. So I turned around and, being familiar with the area, made my way around the closure and went on. I texted, let's just say someone that I knew, on the local sheriff's department and asked them what was going on with the road closure. Before he answered me back, I had an overwhelming feeling hit me that I should stick around in the area. There's a cemetery close to the area that I go to quite often and record videos and audio on, so that's where I began to go to. I then get a response. It was a fatal crash, car versus truck head-on, female passenger deceased, and she was from the area. After I pull into the cemetery, I get another message. with 2 photos attached. I opened the attachments, and it was as horrible as I imagined it. One photo was of her car totally destroyed, sheets still covering the driver compartment, and there were 2 firefighters in the photo. One standing at the driver door looking down into the car, and next to him the medical examiner, who was also looking down into the driver area. The second firefighter was standing on the passenger side of the door. He was staring down into the driver area. All 3 wore a somber look on their face. The look made you think that they are thinking to themselves, what a shame. Now in the background of this picture is what you'd expect to see. A fire truck, another emergency vehicle, and of course trees. Now I had been given the deceased driver's name because due to the career that I retired from, I had dealt with her on several occasions and knew that he had too dealt with her a few times. Now as I sat there in the cemetery looking at the picture, I kept getting that overwhelming feeling that I was missing something that was in the photo, and that inner voice, if you want to call it that, kept telling me to look again, to keep looking, and that's exactly what I did. I kept looking at it. Finally something said enlarge it, zoom on the 2 at the driver's door. It was almost like something was begging me, longing me to keep looking. So that's what I did, and then it was like a hammer. Every hair on my body stood on end at once, and I gasped for breath because I became physically sick to my stomach. I knew this female, but it had been a few years since I dealt with her, but there was no denying it. In the photograph of the crash, just behind the 2 emergency service workers standing at the driver's door was the face of the deceased girl. I could not believe what I was looking at, and for me there was no denying that she was standing behind them, looking down into the driver's compartment. The look on her face was complete and total shock, like she was staring at her own body crumpled on the floorboard area, asking herself, why? What have I done? What about my daughter? I took a screenshot of the enlarged photo and showed it to the deputy. The following day, I went to see him and got the full story of what happened. Apparently, it took place before I showed him the screenshot, and the look on her face explained more so when I heard what led to the crash. I told him I wanted him to look at the enlarged version of the picture I sent, and when I held it up for him to see, his face instantly, without hesitation, went white. That's her. But that's not possible, she was dead when it was taken. Now I've shown the photo to a limited number of people out of privacy for her and her family, but everyone that has seen it have the same reaction. In the photograph, her appearance appeared younger, with her original hair color and style. Now I've had a job like this for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of death. I've had people, including children, pass away in my arms, and I've handled a lot of fatalities, but never have I had anything like this happen to me in all my years. My family has owned our property since around the time my mum was little, so that's around 42 years now. Growing up, there was this house on our property that was locked up tight and basically falling apart inside that we unfortunately didn't have the money to demolish yet. Inside there wasn't really anything of value. There was a massive wasp nest that I swear was the size of a dumpster, and rats' nests everywhere. That locked up house had been on the property before my family purchased it, and a long while after. When we finally got the money to demolish it, I was around 10 or 11. My grandfather went inside a few times to clean it out a bit to see if there were any valuables in the rats' nests or stowed somewhere else. He hadn't bothered to check before. During one of his searches, he found an old locket. It was sort of old and had a unicorn and rainbow on the front. And he found a digital clock inside that was busted. Little kid me loved it and asked to have it, so he let me keep it. For the next few days that it took the house to be demolished, I had awful luck. My favourite action figure broke, my favourite SNES game lost all its data, until one night after the house was finally demolished, I had a vivid nightmare that some awful shadow woman monster appeared from where the house had once been, grabbed the locket off my neck, and went out the bedroom window, and took off in a swoosh of smoke. In the morning I couldn't find the locket at all, and needless to say I was extremely freaked out. I remembered it, and looked for it for about a week and a year, eventually deciding it was lost. That is until 23 years later I found it. I found it upstairs in the attic, where I knew I'd never been because I wasn't allowed to play there due to the splinters and it being very hot. I swear my heart stopped, and I got this eerie feeling from looking at it. But I also felt this tugging inside that wouldn't let me just leave it there, so I took it. My luck sucked for a solid week after I found it, but I'm still incapable of getting rid of it. I just hid it in a drawer and don't touch it, and I'm wondering if this pendant is cursed or something. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know in the usual way. It is always very much appreciated. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and why not check out the perks you get for doing so. All my members and patrons who may have forgotten, feel free to refresh your memories. But that's all from me for tonight. If you'd like another video, links are on screen now. But until next time, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.